for my voice, but I have never seen anything like it.
You believe in miracles? Yes! Unbelievable.
Welcome back to the show. Thank you so much for clicking on our podcast link. I know there's a lot of options for you to check out, so checking out ours means a lot. Thanks. We've got Ben Kercheval on from CBS Sports talking to us about the XFL. We go over all the teams. We talk about what do we expect from said teams. Talk about the gambling odds, how you should probably be hammering the under a lot of times on these guys, and just the entire system that the XFL has built up out of kind of the ashes of the AAF. So, a lot of good stuff we get into. I'm going to throw it over to Ben. Here he is right now. All right, on the phone line right now from CBS Sports covering the XFL, we got Ben Kercheval. Ben, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, perfect. Let's talk about this season, which starts on Sunday. And because of the NFL playoffs, I think Fox did a pretty good job all throughout the playoffs, kind of slipping it in there in their advertising and say, hey, we got this other product coming up. But during the Super Bowl, during the build-up to the Super Bowl, the XFL kind of, I thought, took a back seat, except for that one tweet at the very end where they said, okay, it's our time now. How excited are people around, as you're covering these teams, how excited are people around to get the season started?
Well, they're excited because, this has been a couple years in the making. You go back to 2017 when you had the ESPN 30 for 30. This was the XFL. And, the bit of history there was that was produced by Charlie Eversole, that's Dick Eversole's kid. He ran the AAF last year, which was another one of those spring startup leagues. Didn't even last a full season, but it kind of goes to show how sort of tight-knit the Eversoles and the McMahon family still are. But, that was at that time that Vince kind of dropped the hint, and a little bit less than a year later, they hired Oliver Luck to be the commissioner, who's kind of in his own way got a lot of name recognition from his time with both college and professional athletics, namely with, NFL Europe, when that was a thing in the late 90s. So, it's been one of those things that's been building up for a long time. And because there's been such a gap between the original XFL and now this, I think you've had an opportunity for I guess you'd say the lore or the revisionist history about the XFL to kind of come around where, it was such a massive failure the first time, but you look at the NFL today and there are so many things technology-wise and entertainment-wise that the XFL really influenced. There's the XFL fingerprints all over the place with today's modern NFL coverage. And so now I think is this really smart time to bring it back. And so with that, you get, I think similar to what you had with the AAF last year, you have, I don't know that I would call it a national excitement. I think I'd call it more of a grassroots excitement. And that comes with fan pages, blogs, people who are very team centric and, league centric, but I do think there's more of a national media attention to it than there was the first time around, but I also think that's in large part because this XFL is, at least as they say, is way more focused on football, whereas what was really the downfall of the first XFL it was way more of a branch of what was then the WWF under McMahon. It was more game show than it was actual football, and so it wasn't taken as seriously. I think this time around, when you add in gambling, when you add in fantasy football, when you just add in the fact that there is more of an insatiable appetite for football year round than there ever has been, I think now's the right time to reintroduce it to the marketplace.
Yeah, so what's the difference between the AAF and the XFL for like the casual fan who last year was rooting for, let's say, the San Antonio Commanders, and then that team goes defunct? Why should they get into the XFL?
Well, I mean, you can get into the XFL for a number of reasons. If you want to know what the key difference is between the AAF and the XFL, even though they're both football leagues in that, again, they're trying to be an actual football league, not like a sideshow entertainment piece. They're both pretty similar in that regard, but they're markedly different enterprises. I mean, they are or were both LLCs. There's that component of it, but they are they were trying to do different things. The AAF was trying to tether itself to the hip of the NFL so that down the road it could be basically its official development league. And then on the back end, Charlie Ebersol worked with a lot of Vegas investors to put together a technology package that would be pretty big for betting, fantasy down the road. And at some point later on, you sell that off, make a profit off of it. He was viewing it very much like kind of a Silicon Valley business, if you want to view it that way. And the medium was a spring football league, whereas the XFL is a much stronger brand right up front. They have a much stronger broadcast television partnership with ESPN and Fox. They are really more about being standalone. I wouldn't necessarily say that they're trying to compete with the NFL because that's an impossible task, but they are trying to really be their own entity and to be something that is sustainable. And so they're different and they're the same kind of at the same time, but they're at the end of the day, if the AAF was still around, I don't know that there would be room in the marketplace for two of those spring leagues, but I do think there is enough room for one. We'll see how long it lasts. I don't know, but I think if you're going to give it a shot, again, now is probably the time.
Perfect time. All right, so let's talk about the teams and you talked about gambling too. The minute I looked up XFL teams and I was trying to get a little bit of prep work done, it gave me all the gambling odds for every team and who they thought was going to be the MVP and who was going to win the Super Bowl and everything. So I was really impressed by that. 8-team league, I really like how it's smaller than most college conferences. I think that was kind of a big factor in it, just not only from a money standpoint, but it's easier with 8 teams to get invested.
Is that a question, or you just say like?
So my question would be right now then, why are the Tampa Bay Vipers so much further ahead than some of the bigger market teams like the Los Angeles Wildcats and the New York Guardians when you look at gambling odds?
So that's a really tough question to answer. And so you have in Vegas, the way that they kind of do this is they get sort of their background research on the players. Were any of those players in, the NFL, how they do in the NFL, are they on the roster now? What about the coaching staff? How successful were they at their previous stops? I mean, those are kind of the background things that go into this. And then from there, they try to have to calculate these numbers and put something out there that, again, the purpose of betting lines is to get the maximum amount of money, across the board. So it's a pretty, I wouldn't say it's a complex formula necessarily, but there is a formula to it. But when you haven't even played a down of football, a lot of this is fool's gold. You'd be just as served to bet one team as you would to bet another, because nobody really knows how it's going to turn out. I mean, we released power rankings today, like Cody Benjamin did it for us. Man, Cody doesn't know. None of us know. I went down to training camp. I got in front of about maybe half the teams. You know what? They all look the same. They do. They all look the same. They all look like they need work. They all look like they're trying to sort of put this whole thing together. They're not showing a whole lot. So those preseason gambling odds, especially when you're just entering the first sort of run of this thing, it's a big guessing game, even more so than it normally is. Lines in week one, it's really through the first few weeks are probably going to be just all over the place. The one thing I will say, and I'm not even a huge Vegas guy, whatever the line is, unless it's absurdly low, I'm just telling people smash unders just for the first few weeks, because those defenses are always more ahead of the offenses.
All right, that's good to know, first off. But so Aaron Murray is the quarterback right now for the Tampa Bay Vipers. I saw him play in college. I saw him play in the AAF. I think that I was kind of looking through the rosters. Is he the most talented quarterback that they have right now in the league, do you think?
I wouldn't say that.
Okay.
I think there are guys who are individually more talented than Aaron Murray. In fact, I think DC has a couple of them, Tyree. I think Tyree Jackson's with the Defenders. I'd have to double check that.
Cardell Jones would be the guy right now, I think, for the Defenders that people are getting really excited for.
Well, yeah, him and so there's him, and again, there's Jackson. Again, I don't know if Jackson's with DC or not, but he might be with another team. But it's those two guys. I think Josh Johnson, who's with Los Angeles. I've been told that LA is probably going to trot out a couple of quarterbacks. He's going to be one of them. So it's hard to tell. The one thing I would just say about quarterbacks is there's a guy out there with really raw talent. You mentioned Jones. Everyone knows he's got a big arm. He can run a little bit if need be. And from there, and this is where I think coaching really matters, is you need great play calling and great coaching to kind of supplement that a little bit. And I think one thing that helps is the XFL is full of guys who have called plays in college, because when you get into the NFL, you have to be, from a mental standpoint, you have to be ready. Otherwise, unless you're like a first-round draft pick, you've got to be ready right away to come in here and take that next step mentally, and on top of that, you got to stay healthy. And so that's why a lot of guys slip through the cracks. It's not that they're not talented. It's that the pace of the NFL and training camp is so fast that if at any point you lose a step, you can fall behind really quickly. And so what helps is to have some of those college coaches who can kind of sort of reel that back in a little bit, work with these quarterbacks, get them in positions to be successful and work with them. And then maybe in a year or two, when their contract is up, they have another shot to play in the NFL.
That was what I was looking at, too, with the XFL, is that there does seem to be a lot of college football talent that, you're wondering, hey, I watched this guy 3-4 years ago. What happened to him? Oh, now he's playing in the XFL. I think that is kind of an interesting standpoint, too. When you talked about getting in front of all these teams, was there any team that stood out to you? Because you said they all kind of look the same. Okay.
No, and I'm not trying to deflect your question because it's a good question. It's just they all really kind of look the same. Now, I mean, I've talked to people behind the scenes, and they will tell me, hey, we feel really good about our offensive line. We feel really good about our wide receivers. We feel really good about, our running game. I mean, so different teams will kind of sort of give some hints onto what they think their strength is going to be. But when you're talking about scrimmages and them running drills, I mean, there are certain guys that maybe kind of pop off the field a little bit. And it's not actually a coincidence. Some of those guys were AAF guys. You look at Mikael McKay, who's with Houston, and he was a San Antonio guy last year for the Commanders. I mean, he's a big time player. So you'll have some of those guys. Terrence Garvin is with the St. Louis Battlehawks. He was probably the defensive MVP for the Orlando Apollos last year with the AAF. So some of those guys made the transition over from the AAF to the XFL, and because they've a little bit more recently played some pro football, even though it's not in the NFL, they look like guys who, they really are just that half step below an NFL roster. I mean, the difference between some of the NFL backups and some of the starters in the XFL, it's not very much. A lot of times it's due to injuries. It's due to contract situations. It's just about finding good fits, a good roster fits. And just for some guys, it's just not always there, but they are, I'm telling you, they're right there on the cusp.
I was talking to my friends about this, and I was saying that I think that in 2 or 3 years, this is going to be the perfect middle ground between college football, where you might get a 65-point blowout because the other team just doesn't have that talent that the starting team might have, and the NFL, where every single game is decided by like 3 points. I think the AAF is going to have or the XFL, I should say, is going to have a really good in-between ground going forward. So, last thing before I let you go here is I noticed that the Seattle Dragons, the Los Angeles Guardians, the Wildcats, 4-point wins. How many games are played in this season? Because I couldn't nail it down when I was doing my research before the show. Like, how many games are we expecting from this season for Spring League?
There's 10 games.
There's 10 games. I think a lot of these teams are going to go 5-5. Is that like?
Oh yeah. I mean, that's what happened with the AAF last year. Is again, you had like one really good team, which was the Orlando Apollos. you had like 2 really bad teams, and then you had like 5 teams that were within 1 or 2 games of each other. And that's I would say probably to be expected.
All right. I'm going to let you go. Can you tell them where they can find you on Twitter, where they can read your work on SB Sports or CBSSports.com?
Yeah, it's going to be my name at Ben Kercheval. And then Cody Benjamin, again, is going to be our other guy this year. So you can find him on Twitter as well. And, we have an XFL page at CBSSports.com. We don't have a Twitter handle or anything like that just yet. We're not that developed into it. We have to kind of wait and see if it survives a season or 2, I think, before we really flesh this thing out. But there is an XFL page, and we're pretty good about trying to post things pretty much every day, whether it's news or analysis or power rankings or the lines or stories, features, things like that. And then we'll have coverage pretty much all weekend long. So this is actually a little bit of a better deal than the AAF last year. Last year, it was me and one editor responsible for the entire thing. And this year, we have a little bit more of a team built out. So we're pretty excited about, I think, the coverage we're going to be able to have.
That's so cool. Thank you so much, Ben. We're going to have you come on before again.
Yeah, man. Thanks a lot.
All right. Thanks again to Ben for coming on the show, breaking it down for us. I told myself I wasn't going to gamble this year. In 2020, I thought it was a bad vice. I needed to get out of it. But let me tell you that the XFL might be bringing me back home, baby. Some of these game lines I don't trust at all. The Vipers being 7.5-point favorites, 7-win favorites this season makes me kind of nervous, especially when I think the median wins for a lot of these teams is going to be 5. I might not bet the championships, but I may be betting game by game down the road. We'll see. And he talked about fantasy a little bit, and I wish I could have talked to him a little bit more about it, because I would be interested in playing fantasy football for the XFL. Granted, we only have about 4 days now before the game kicks off and before everybody gets ready, so I don't think we have enough time to set up the Andrew Zimmel Podcast Fantasy Football League. I don't think we have enough time for that. But maybe in the future, if we can keep the XFL around, if the XFL stays around, I think that that's going to be something that we might do in the future, so keep your eyes out for it. All right. Had Television Tuesday yesterday. We talked a little bit about the Michael Vick documentary. Tomorrow we have the second part of that. Thursday we have the second part of that, so I'm pretty excited. It's honestly one of the better documentaries. And then I'm going to start talking a little bit more about NBA, so I'm going to try to rotate some NBA writers on. And I have a secret guest that we're going to bring on when the inevitable trade of Mookie Betts happens from the Boston Red Sox. And, of course, Film Friday, as always. So, be on the lookout. We have a ton of good shows coming up, a ton of good content coming down the road for you guys. Thank you so much again for listening. I know you have a lot of options, so checking us out means a lot. Thanks. I will see you guys tomorrow.